Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and on the opposite side of the studio glass is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Well, glad to be here, Rory. This is episode 150 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We have 3 topics that we're going to be covering in this episode, starting off with a student-related topic, stepping on to the next level. What's it like going from a level 3 to a level 4? We're going to be kind of looking into that. And then we're going to check in with our very good friends at CPCAB, where, Rory, you had a chat with Kelly Budd of something that I guess is quite topical at the time of the recording of this, and that is preparing for those pesky exams.
Yes, I met up with Kelly and spoke about some useful tips and hints about preparing for exams to reduce that kind of exam stress that is always going around this time of year, or at the time when exams are taken, Ken.
Looking forward to that one. And then we end episode 150 with something rather special indeed. It is an interview with Professor Windy Dryden, a man who has written many books. I remember reading some of his books during my counselling studies, and this is on single session therapy. I know we ran an actual lecture with Windy Dryden that was very, very well attended, and the comments that have come in, the feedback has just been so very positive. So many people got so much from that. So that's kind of how we will end today's episode. But starting off with stepping onto that next level, I guess at the time of us recording this, it's many students are maybe considering progression on their course. They might be going from a level 2 to a level 3, or a level 3 to a level 4. And what's it like, that next level, Rory?
Well, that's the question we're going to try to shed some light on. And it's a question that's been asked a lot in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor. We're a closed group. Knock on the door. We're going to let you in, and you're going to meet thousands of like-minded people, students who are studying counselling and psychotherapy, some qualified colleagues, and also a soupçon, a smattering of tutors and supervisors, all talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. But it is a question that comes up a lot. What is the difference between, going from, say, level 3 to level 4? Well, the first thing I would say is that with level 4, it's usually a 2-year course. So we're talking about UK qualifications here. Apologies if you're listening in a different part of the world. But in the UK, the diploma course is 2 years. So the first thing I guess you've got to consider is, can you commit for 2 years? Because that is a lot of time out of someone's life. And, if you've got any other plans, if you're thinking of moving home or changing jobs, even starting a family, and obviously, starting a family shouldn't preclude anybody from taking and be successful in the course. However, it is a consideration because it means that some things change. So you've really got to be thoughtful. Can you commit to 2 years? And that will be a question you'll be asked by your tutor. Can you commit to 2 years of study? Because that's how long a diploma in counselling takes, Ken.
Yeah. And if you're kind of considering this from the beginning, you'd have a level 2, which is kind of the introductory level, I guess. And that's around about 10 weeks. And it gives you a flavour of what counselling is, what counselling isn't, the different modalities of counselling. It might cover some of the very basic skills. Going from a level 2, the progression would then be to go on to a level 3, which again here in the UK is mostly a year long. You would do a level 3 with a heavy focus on the counselling skills, but you would also delve deeper into the theory and into some more of the practice-based issues such as contracting, note-taking, working ethically and to the law. And I guess if you look from level 2 to level 3, it's a massive step, level 2 to level 3, from a 10-week course to a 1-year course. But when you go from level 3 to level 4, it's a massive step again. It really is. It's almost not a step, but more of a stride going into level 4. And it does require careful consideration of who you are, what your life is, like at this moment. As Rory has already mentioned, that the time commitment of 2 years, and you need to be there. A counselling course is not something you can kind of drop out for a couple of weeks while you tend to stuff and then pick up again. The 2 years is absolutely packed. You'll go a lot deeper into theory. The assignment work is heavy on a level 4. You're going to be asked to do case studies. Hitting the academic criteria steps up a level as well, becomes a little more complex in the way that you're asked to answer questions. And you're going to be balancing that with doing a placement practice where you are actually in practice while you are kind of supported by your college and your supervisor, or your learning institution and your supervisor, but thinking about the time commitment to doing that placement, which is over and above the studies. And then if you are in placement, you're going to require supervision, which means additional time going to a supervisor. This again, over and above your actual study work. And good courses in the UK will require that somebody that is kind of in those final years will do their own personal therapy as well, to work through their own issues, maybe to experience what therapy is like. And there again is more time that you're called on. So when you kind of look at your balance in your life, if you have a full-time job and a family, interests and hobbies, it really is a big ask and quite a commitment, and something well worth considering, but of course well worth it.
Absolutely, Ken. And yeah, I think I'll pick up on the point. It is a little bit like having a part-time job. It's literally like having a part-time job, because you'll be doing more hours in class. You'll be doing your practice, your supervision. And I think one of the things that people may not be prepared for is the personal development aspect, a big shift in how we see the world and how we maybe negotiate our friendships and our relationships. I know that tutors sometimes call the diploma course the divorce course, because there are a lot of people whose relationships split up through the arc of it. Certainly, I think about 50% of the people on my course separated from their partners because they realised they weren't happy and they weren't getting what they needed. So the personal development aspect can be quite formative. I think it can be quite a big part of the course, and of course at the end of it, you're a different person. Most people who do 2 years of 3 years of counselling courses are not the same people who started. Their view of the world has changed. They've become more proficient in using skills. They understand human behaviour better. They understand their own kind of intrapsychic behaviour, intrapsychic meaning understanding self. It's a big ask. I have to say that I've done a lot of courses since I did my diploma, and there's not one of them that's been as arduous or, if I'm really honest, as meaningful.
Yeah, I know you studied education post-grad from your counselling, and it as did I, and it doesn't really compare to what is required from you in that level 4 of counselling. And if you're listening to this and you're considering going on to a level 4, maybe you're at a level 3, this is not to put you off. It's not to paint a picture of a massive mountain that you have to climb. That's why I put in at the end that little bit of it is so worth it. And it's about enjoying the journey as you go. Enjoy each step. And I guess if there's any advice, it's to not get caught up in looking too far ahead. It's to concentrate on the steps that you're taking right now. Look down at your feet rather than 2 years ahead at a certificate that would say that you are a counsellor, because on that journey it is so enriching, it is so rewarding, it is so challenging. But that is the nature of what we study, and it parallels what we will go through with our clients at some level, in that clients will come into therapy, and for them it will be a massive undertaking. They will consider it before going in. When they come in, it might be difficult and it might be challenging along the way, but we would hope for them that there would be fulfillment, or that they would get something from that.
Yes, and you know, it's lovely to see, as a former tutor myself, Ken and myself are both tutors. We both taught on diploma courses, and it's lovely to see the students coming to the end of it. It is a bit of a struggle for some people, and you know, and maybe I think courses should be rigorous and should be demanding, because ultimately we're working with vulnerable people, and we may have to assess life and death situations. It doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. So yes, and also it teaches a very valuable life lesson to live in the here and now. Not to invest too much in the past or invest too much in the future, to live in the here and now and make our decisions in the here and now. So if you are going to do the diploma, or indeed maybe going on to do a 2-year course at a university, you may be doing a degree or a master's degree, be prepared for what is going to be a interesting trek up a hill. But when you get to the top, I have to tell you, the view is beautiful.
I like that analogy, Rory. I can almost see that view from here. And Rory and I, we kind of really understand this, as Rory said, from being tutors together. But we also have created a library of resources for students on this very journey that kind of spans from level 2 right through to master's degree, where Rory has created academically rigorous lectures that kind of link in to the very topics that you'll be studying along that journey, whether it be level 2, level 3, level 4 or beyond. So if you're interested in our counselling study resource, over 40,000 students have used our resources to kind of hit their learning goals, then you can check more of that by going to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. All the information is right there, and just click on the Counselling Study Resources tab, and there's a little video that'll tell you about it and a page that will describe that in detail, and you can see if that's for you. But I guess part of that progression is getting through your exams, Rory.
It's true, Ken, yes.
And you spoke to Kelly Budd at CPCAB, that's our friendly awarding body, and kind of give us a smattering of what we can expect on getting through these exams.
Yeah, well, before I touch on Kelly Budd's observations on exams, just to remind everyone, I've made a handout for the next level. If you go to 150, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, which is our mother website, click on the podcast tab, look for episode 150, and you'll be able to download that handout. Handout moving up to the next level checklist gives you just some observations of what you might have to consider if you're thinking of moving up to the next level. And so from the beginning of a counselling journey to coming to the end of one, as we check in with Kelly Budd.
Yeah.
And Kelly tells us a little bit about preparing for exams. It's something that we get asked a lot about in the Facebook group and in the mailbag. And Kelly just outlines some very practical things that you can do to prepare for exams that might just take the pressure off a bit.
Oh, I like pressure that gets taken off. Let's check in with CPCAB.
Check in with CPCAB.
And we're joined by Kelly Budd from CPCAB, and she's going to be talking about preparing for exams. It's about this time of year that people may be doing some exam preparation. So what advice or observations would you have for those who are preparing for exams, Kelly?
Hi, Rory. Well, I think it's one of those really difficult areas where students, often if they're really good in class and they're very, very competent at what they're doing, sometimes the exam can be the thing that makes people really fearful or give them a wobble. And I think often people harken back to kind of school time and kind of the fear of going into an exam hall. But we do think there's quite a few things that people can do to kind of try and offset or at least prepare themselves for going into an exam room and kind of trying to really demonstrate and show off what it is that they can do. So that was what we thought we'd talk about today.
Yes, and I think you've already hit on something quite pertinent. Not that I mentioned transference a lot in the podcast, but transference, that idea that we may be accessing the feelings from being school children and being different people going into exams, that can have a big effect, can't it?
Yeah, I think it can. And I think at CPCAB, one of the things that we try to do as much as we can is to design the exams. We call it an external assessment because it's marked by someone external to your tutor, but an exam, essentially. We try to design our exams so that they feel as different as they possibly can to the sort of ones you might have done in school. So they're very rarely a great big detailed long quiz of questions that doesn't have any kind of variety to it. So with us, sometimes you're watching a DVD and answering questions about that, or you're doing a simulated counselling practice and you've got to show your skills, and then you get given a few questions around your own practice. So we try and style them so that it breaks down some of that potential transference, so that it doesn't feel, so it feels very different to exams they might have experienced in the past.
Yes, and I think the other thing that sometimes confuses people is that the exam only asks of you what you've been taught in the course. You're not going to be asked things that you're not being taught, really, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be my first kind of number one tip for students. We as an awarding body, we can only ask you questions that relate directly to the learning outcomes and the assessment criteria in your candidate guide. So if it's not in there, we can't ask it of you, and you will have been taught all of that by the time you get to your exam. So essentially you are your best resource because you've been there in the class, you've been learning it all. And if you want a kind of really good starting point for revision, look through your assessment criteria from top to bottom and think, am I confident in every single one of these? And if any ones stand out to you where you think, oh, I was maybe off that day, or I don't really think I got my head around that, start there with your revision. Because if you've got a weak part in there, you don't want that to be the thing that comes up in the exam. Make sure that you think you've got at least a balanced understanding of all of them.
Yes, and of course, if you don't know, ask your tutor, check with peers. Obviously you can ask questions in our Facebook group and there'll be lots of people there to support you. But if you're not sure, ask. I think that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks for people. They're afraid to ask, they don't ask, and then come the exam, they don't know, and then that just leads on to not passing. So ask. The other thing is, you talk about guidance. So there is guidance issued by CPCAB and a lot of other exam providers. What does the guidance look like, Kelly?
Well, one of the kind of big pieces of guidance that we send out is there's a candidate guide to the exam for the level 4, which is quite a chunky booklet. And I firmly believe if candidates read that, they know exactly what every aspect of the exam is going to look and feel like and what sort of areas they're going to need to study. But sometimes we do get some papers in and we look at it and think, oh, I don't think this candidate's even read the guide. But it's available on the website. Your tutor should be able to provide it to you as well. And it will explain, so with the level 4, for example, what is required in your recording. And then it will explain what areas each one of the questions in the paper can be focused on. So they should really feel familiar with it by the time they go in, because we don't want them to have a surprise when they walk into the exam room at the end of the day. We want them to feel confident. We're genuinely not trying to catch people out.
No, and that's sometimes some irrational thinking, isn't it? That somehow the exam body or the awarding body is somehow trying to trip people up. That's not the case, is it? That's not the case at all.
Oh, we want people to be proficient. We absolutely do. There'd be no point in us coming in the morning and thinking, oh, how can we catch out this group of students? We really do want them to be as well informed as they can possibly be going in.
So that nails that urban myth. We've got rid of that urban myth. Now, I think one of the useful tools that students can really draw on, of course, is the mock exam, isn't it?
Yes, every centre should be running a mock exam a good period of time before the students sit the actual exam. Under the same conditions, we issue a mock paper for every one of our levels that has an examination. So they should be able to really feel and understand what it's like to be in that room, and then have the opportunity afterwards to debrief, whether it's in the next session or at the same time, and really talk through, get feedback on the answers that they wrote down, and kind of live the experience and test out how their nerves are while they're in there. So basically so that they can be as well prepared as possible. Some centres will even do their own mini mock and then another mini mock and then a proper mock exam. So centres really do also want to support students to pass.
Yeah, so there's another kind of urban myth disposed of in short order, and that is that your tutors somehow don't want you to pass. And it may seem strange, but I've actually had students in the mailbag write to me and say, "I'm sure that the awarding body are out to catch me out," and that is absolutely not the case at all. In fact, it creates more work if someone doesn't pass, doesn't it?
Yeah. From our point of view, the perfect scenario would be that every student is really happy going to their exam and they answer all the questions correctly and they pass. That would be our perfect day.
Yes, yeah, perfect for everybody.
Yeah.
You don't have to reissue any paperwork. The learners get their certificates and go off into qualified life, and the tutors can breathe a sigh of relief. So it's a three-way win, isn't it? One of the things I used to say to my students when they were doing any assessment was read the question.
Yeah, I can't stress this enough. I think that's the one thing where students do think we're trying to catch them out is the wording of the question. And sometimes it's just because people have rushed through their read of it, got an idea in their head of what they think the question's asking for, gone into an answer, and then gone back and looked at it afterwards and thought, oh no, that wasn't actually what it was asking for at all. And it's awful. I remember it being heartbreaking as a tutor when you'd see a student and you knew that they knew their stuff, but they'd misread the question, gone off on a tangent, and just kind of the poor exam technique of not really kind of underlining or highlighting words on the exam paper just let them down because they didn't really focus on what was being asked for.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to say to my students, we used to do this thing, I used to point to the wall and say, what colour is the wall? And some people would say it's blue. Job done. And some people would say, well, it's blue, but it's got a white skirting board. No, that's not what I asked you. and we do this, and some of them would think it was quite funny. I think others got a bit kind of frustrated at me doing this, but it was just to get into the head that this isn't. We sometimes when we talk about things, we have a conversation, and a lot of the things that could be covered in a question asked in a conversation can be done conversationally because we fill the gaps in. But an exam pet, you've really got to treat the examiner like an idiot. You've got to say,
yeah,
you've got to pretend they don't know anything, and you're telling them, and then
yeah, absolutely. The exam question will ask you one specific thing. It might have two components to it, but it's asking for something very, very specific. That's all we want you to tell us. Is your answer to exactly that question. We don't want everything you've learned about that particular topic in the entire year of your studies. We don't want you to kind of overdo it and get yourself too stressed out trying to remember everything that you know. Just answer exactly what's on the paper. No more, no less, and do that. And I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. Slow down, read the question, just answer the question.
So if you're asked to name the core conditions, you would just name the core conditions. You wouldn't have to write a biopic on Carl Rogers or the people he met on his way to get his coffee. It's just that.
Yeah. And again, we've had this discussion before about looking at the terminology that we use. So name is different to describe. Describe is different to evaluate or compare. So really look at the kind of the verbs that are being used in exam questions as well, because they are your really big tip in terms of what's being looked for.
Yeah, and if you're not sure about the taxonomy, sometimes that's what we use in academic circles, testing the level of knowledge. So list would be at the bottom of the scale, make a list, and then evaluate and critically evaluate would be right at the top. So if you don't know what those terms are, look them up, or your tutor will tell you and give you a good idea of what that particular verb is asking of you in terms of the knowledge you need to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can be a bit nerve-wracking, can't it, Kelly, when you go into exams?
It can. I remember being a student and being really nervous about going into an exam room. And I think usually what undermined me was I would be more nervous if I knew I was ill prepared. So particularly at university, I knew I'd had a long night the night before, hadn't done all my revision, walked to the exam room just feeling sick because I knew that I could have done better walking into that room. So prepare, I think, is a really good way of getting over the nerves. But find out what works for you. It's a very personal thing, anxiety. So experiment beforehand what works for you when you're in that sort of pressure situation. Might be some mindfulness, might be some breathing techniques, might just be meeting up with your classmates 10 minutes before the exam outside the college and having a giggle just to kind of break the ice, relieve some of the tension. But people are very, very different, and I think find out what is going to ease your exam nerves on the day. Maybe even do, if you know that exam nerves are a problem for you, do some work with your tutor beforehand. Get them to take you through some ways of kind of reducing that stress level for you. They want, as I said, they want you to pass. They want you to be successful. They will put in the personal work with you to try and get you through, so that you can show what you really know.
Absolutely, and maybe just to remember that you're an adult now. You know, to be in an adult place with it, and not maybe bring those feelings from the past in, which sometimes happens.
Yeah, and I think it is kind of remembering you've chosen this course, you've chosen to learn these areas, you want to do it for the right reasons. So you're an adult walking into that room. You're not a kid that got shoved into a classroom without any choices, and you're choosing to walk into that exam room as well. You have autonomy.
Yes.
So go in there and do your absolute best. And I think don't be too hard on yourself.
Yes.
It's an exam. Part of the very nature of an exam is you are either going to achieve or not pass. And I think going in with a little bit of internal acknowledgement of that's part of what you sign up for. Sometimes you're going to be proficient, sometimes you're not going to be proficient. We allow people to resit for that very reason. People do it with driving tests. Everyone says, oh, all the best people pass second time round. And maybe that is it. Maybe it just wasn't your time, and it's okay.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly fine to kind of go in there, try your best, and actually if it doesn't come off, try again. That it's about counselling. It's all about the process. You'll learn by failing just as much as you would learn by passing.
Absolutely, Kelly. And the very best drivers, they're the ones who passed on their third attempt, because that's when I passed a long time ago now. But yes, very, very wise words. And as always, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Check-in with CPCAB is proudly sponsored by CPCAB, the only awarding body run by counsellors for counsellors. To learn more about CPCAB qualifications and to get more detailed information on today's podcast topic, visit cpcab.co.uk.
Well, fantastic words of wisdom there from Kelly, and I'm sure that I would have been grateful of that when I was at school. to prepare me for the exams that I never took. So really useful observations. And for anybody out there who is taking exams, I know at the time of recording it's quite a difficult situation with the lockdown we find ourselves in. But I think those observations are really universal, Ken.
Indeed. And moving now on to our last topic, into Practice Matters. Practice Matters is where we look to our colleagues in practice and talk about things that you might come across in practice, and look at all things continuous professional development. And I think a truly special privilege to have a luminary, I like that word, Rory, I stole it from you, a luminary of counselling, which is Professor Wendy Dryden, speaking about single session therapy. Now, I have to admit, single session therapy, when I first heard single session therapy, I have to admit that I thought to myself, how effective can single session therapy really be? Considering that I was taught that you have to go through a whole process in the counselling relationship of building rapport, and only when that rapport is built will the trust be there, and so on and so forth. But attending Professor Wendy Dryden's lecture recently and watching, I guess, the theoretical presentation of single session therapy, and then seeing Professor Dryden actually doing a demonstration live via the internet of single session therapy, I was moved. I really was moved. I actually learnt from it. I could relate to my own processes in just watching it. Truly remarkable, and a privilege for me to watch.
Absolutely, Ken. And one doesn't like to bandy the word legend about, but I think it's a title that I think is easily attached to Wendy Dryden. I think most universities have his books in their library. I've got them in my library. I read Wendy Dryden when I was studying, And just to see this demonstration of therapy. So just to be clear, there was the lecture included the theoretical aspects of it, where he talked about the theory, but he did a live demonstration of the therapy as well. And it was just incredible. I don't like to kind of use hyperbole, but it was magical. It was really, really magical. How much you could do in a single session. And I agree with you, Ken. It goes against the kind of ideas that we've been taught for years, that has to be long sessions, has to be, never-ending sessions. The amount of work that can be done in one session with a particular skill set is just incredible. So let's just have a look at what Windy Dryden has to say. Let's have a listen to Windy Dryden.
Definitely. We're going to dive into that practice matters. And remember, if you wanted to see Windy Dryden actually doing that demonstration, we'll give you the details of how you can access that lecture after Practice Matters.
Practice Matters.
And we welcome Professor Windy Dryden, who's a Matrix Professor at Goldsmiths College in London. So, Windy, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Rory.
And you've recently recorded a webinar for Counsellor CPD on single session therapy. It was very well received. And I wonder if you could just outline what the basis of single session therapy is.
I think the basis is that it's a way of trying to help a person at the point of need rather than at the point of availability, and to harness a number of factors that would encourage that process to occur. One of those factors is what we call a single session mindset that the counselor needs to adopt. The other factor is that the client also needs to really bring to the table the idea that they can be helped quickly if they work with the therapist. The therapist needs to surrender some of their ideas about the importance of ongoing counselling and relational depth. Not entirely, of course, but for the purpose of working within a single session, one at a time context. It's the idea that people can be helped briefly, and we have numerous personal examples of that. If we think about our own histories, that will be the case. And the idea that time can be used effectively, and that if we have the client in front of us now, that's all we know. We don't know if they're going to come back. So let's use the now to help them now.
Yes, and it's interesting because in the lecture you kind of gave some startling research of the average number of sessions that clients had, and I think there's a lot of people who were kind of weren't aware that it's actually very low. What is the statistic, the average number that clients have?
Well, but let's be clear, Roy, I'm not talking about the average, because if you go for the average, so let's suppose you've got 10 clients come for one session. No, 9 clients come for one session, and one client comes for 100 sessions, and you try to have the average, then that will be quite high. But so the figure I was talking about is called the mode, which is the frequently occurring number within a set. And in that situation that I just spoke about, where 9 clients come for one session and one comes for over 100, then the mode, or the most frequent occurring number of sessions that clients in that group will have, is 1. And that's what we find in public and charitable organizations across the world, where the data where data are available, is that the most frequently occurring number is 1, followed by 2, followed by 3, etc. And that we're not trained to deal with that as counsellors. We're trained on the model that counselling is going to last beyond the one session. One of my colleagues has said the purpose of the first session is to have the client come back for a second session. Now, whatever you think about that, that's not a good way of going into single session counseling. The purpose of the session is to help the person in that session, hoping that then they will go away and, draw upon what they've learned and put it into practice.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really helpful, talking about what type of averages we're looking at, and you use the term the mode. I also think that it's a very pressing idea in a time when people are languishing on waiting lists for extraordinary amounts of time. And if this was adopted, then practically speaking, waiting lists could be reduced quite dramatically if this idea was taken on, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and that is what happens, is that whenever, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been going around the country doing training courses, mainly not exclusively, but certainly in university counselling and college counselling contexts, is that when services have adopted this approach, it does really, I would say, well, I'd put it, is not necessarily bring down waiting lists, but to ensure that people are helped at the point of need more frequently than they would be if, for example, they adopted what I call a blocks of counselling, where everybody gets 6 sessions. Now, blocks increase waiting lists, and single session mode of delivery does reduce it, as you were saying.
Yes, and in the lecture you gave a really in-depth lecture on the theory that underpins single session therapy, but you also gave a demonstration. And what struck me was the way that you used questioning to elicit an idea and the motivation of the clients. Is questioning a integral part, the questioning strategy, an integral part of the mode or the model?
Well, it's certainly an integral part of the way I practice single session therapy. But I should point out that the thing that I like about single session therapy is it's not an approach. It is a mode of service delivery coupled with a mindset. And I think that one of the things that people who are person-centered say is that, can you practice single session therapy within a person-centered or humanistic framework? And I say, well, go and have a look at any of the demonstrations that Carl Rogers did, particularly that with Gloria, which was effectively single session therapy. He wasn't asking any questions. So yes, it's not an integral part of the approach in general, but I would say it's probably an integral part of my particular approach under most circumstances.
Yes, and it was striking for those people who watched the lecture. It would be striking to notice the questioning style really elicited responses. I would imagine there's a lot of people listening to this who would say, "What, single session therapy? Hold their hands up in horror, maybe," and because it tends to push against the kind of collective thinking of therapy. What would your response to that be?
I think you're right. It is a challenging idea, but I think if you see that it is best integrated with other ways of offering counselling, other modes of counselling delivery, as it were, why should it cause horror? Because what you're saying is that let's help people when they come in for help. I mean, as I said in the lecture, how many of us have come in to help people and say, well, look, I only want to help people when they've been on a waiting list for 14 weeks. I think we all kind of generally care. And so why not help people as quickly as we can? Now, it'd be lovely if everybody who came in could have as much counselling as they wanted. And, that's fine. And I'm not against that idea, but that's, we do have to be mindful of the context in which we work, and the context at the moment means that's not going to happen, and it's not likely to happen. in fact, if you think about it, the more royals, celebrities, and other figures come out and understandably, rightly say, look, it's not shameful to have a psychological problem. It's not shameful to seek help. People have come out for help. Well, who's going to see them? We're not necessarily kind of training, tremendously larger numbers of counsellors to deal with these situations. And even if we were, who's going to employ them? Yes. So I think that we do have to kind of be mindful of trying to come up with ways of helping people quickly, and while ensuring that those who need ongoing help can have it. Again, integrated. So if I just might end up by saying that a lot of people are interested in training, and if I could do a little bit of advertising, Rory, just to say that anybody who's interested in training in single session therapy, if you want to write to me, care of my website, www.windydryden.com, I'm putting together a ongoing training program, and I'll be happy to add your list to my mailing list.
Well, thank you very much. I will take away from this that that single session therapy may be a reaction to where we find ourselves in the current climate, with people on waiting lists and offering help to people who need it when they need it. And I'm very grateful of your time. So, Professor Windy Dryden, thank you very much.
Thank you to Professor Windy Dryden. Thank you, Rory. Really interesting and well researched from the source itself.
Yeah, I mean, again, another metaphor from the horse's mouth. And not saying that Professor Dryden's a horse by any stretch of the imagination, but just to hear a person who is effectively ploughing new ground. I mean, this is what we're listening to here. This is the ploughing of new ground. This is the laying down of foundations for a brand new idea, or a development of a brand new idea in therapy. And to be part of that, I think, is a real privilege, Ken. Indeed.
And Professor Windy Dryden's lecture is available on our Counsellor CPD library. And if you're interested in finding out how you can join our Counsellor CPD library, all the information is easily found at counsellingtutor.com. Just go through to our website, click on Counsellor CPD. It will take you through and give you all the information you need to know about that. Basically, it is a library packed with academically rigorous lectures that have learning outcomes very similar to what you've heard Professor Dryden speaking about. It's from the top names, and we try and bring you the information that you can stream to your device rather than getting into a car, having to drive to a venue. So hopefully cutting costs for you, but still delivering the learning outcomes that you would expect to get from your continuing professional development. What an episode, Rory.
Absolutely. We started off with stepping up to the next level, thinking about progression, going from level 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. And then we checked in with Kelly Budd, preparing for exams. Kelly Budd, who is, of course, at CPCAB, who gave us an overview of practical examples of preparing for exams. So useful, certainly at the time of recording, when people will be taking exams. And then we finished with an interview with Professor Windy Dryden. What wisdom there. And I, for one, thoroughly enjoyed it. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
If you're a qualified counsellor or psychotherapist, then why not check out the Counsellor CPD Library? Stay current with your CPD requirements with over 150 hours of academically rigorous, on-demand lectures you can stream to your device. Joining Counsellor CPD will expand your skill set to create a more specialised, highly rewarding practice. For more information on the Counselor CPD library, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.